Alright guys, fasten your seatbelts because I'm kicking up the speed to 88 miles an hour. Where we're going, we're not going to need roads because we're learning about more on economics today. So let's go. From production to consumption. So yesterday we talked about producing a good and the three factors of production, how there is land, labor, and capital involved. Now let's talk about consumption. Actually, when you see the product in the store and you want to buy it and consume the good. So consumption is the act of buying or using goods and services. Obviously, buying goods would be like the stuff in the grocery store. Using services such as, I don't know, like going to a doctor or something of that nature. That's all consumption, even if some is literal consumption into your body and some is more mental. Let's talk about how consumption works, though, and it works in 4 steps. First, people have to have a want. They need it. Whether it be a pair of the latest LeBrons or the latest iPhone, people have to want something in order to justify it being produced, which is where the factors of production kick in. If nobody wants a product, then obviously no one's going to want to produce it because it won't make any money. So for our hypothetical situation, let's take it when somebody wants to buy a new car. So when somebody wants a new car, the step 2 for consumption would be to produce that new car. So you have these factors of production involved, the land, labor, and capital, and you have people taking resources, using their labor in a capital sense to produce a good. We talked a lot about that yesterday, so I'll move on. Step 3 of consumption at that point would be distribution. Once the product is made, somehow it's got to get to the consumer. Like when these cars right here, these Dodge Challengers were built in Michigan and Canada, well, there's a lot of people around the country, around the world that want these cars. How does it get to the people who want these things so that way you can ultimately get paid as the entrepreneur? So it has to be distributed somehow. When it's cars, it's obviously stuff like dealerships. When it's groceries, you have grocery stores. When it's like technology, you have your stores like Best Buy and Apple and all that different stuff. But the biggest thing is once someone produces something, it can't just stay in their factory, obviously. It's got to be distributed. And once it's distributed, that's when consumption happens. And when you take that new car and you literally just do a burnout right out of the dealership or something of that nature, once it reaches into the consumer's hand, the want is then satisfied at that point. Both the consumer's happy because they get the product they want, and the entrepreneur's happy because they get money. I like using this analogy because a lot of people will point out that, like, are you just literally doing this because you're telling us the story of when you bought your car? Yes, and I'm definitely not incriminating myself in any way doing so. Anywho, here's your first notes on today for consumption. Now, when it comes to consumption, all of this comes with a cost. Just like this man here is holding up a bill. There are costs involved when it comes to consumption. And when it comes to economics, every single economic decision, whether it is production or consumption, comes with a cost. Of course, Mr. Shoens, these items aren't free. They naturally come with a price tag, known as a price tag. Yes, I understand that completely, that when you are consuming a good, you have to pay for that good. But that's not the cost I'm referring to. The type of cost I'm referring to is something known as opportunity cost. Now, what opportunity cost is the highest valued benefit given up when a choice is made. Take this example right here. You see this man here who is debating what to do with his time. He can either do 1 hour of studying or he can watch 2 TV episodes. If he chooses the 2 TV episodes, then it costs him 1 hour of studying. If he chooses the 1 hour of studying, it costs him 2 TV episodes at that point. It's not like it's an actual transaction going on here where like money is being lost. It's more of what you give up in return. And when you're doing economic decisions such as buying and selling things, you guys naturally do this. Whether it be like, hey, I want to buy this version of the iPhone because I can save money on it to buy other things. Or if I buy this set of shoes, I won't be able to buy this. That's all known as opportunity costs in economics. So, and the biggest thing with economics when it comes to opportunity costs is if the opportunity cost, meaning how much you lose, is greater than the benefit you receive from your decision, then don't do it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you bought a car. Let's say you have $30,000 to spend, not Zimbabwe dollars, more on that later, United States dollars, and you decide to buy the sports car. Great. But you could have spent that money on college, or actually put a nice sizable down payment for a house, or maybe invested into stocks where you might see your money grow versus a car will just depreciate. You see where the opportunity cost is in that sense? When you made that economic decision, you gave up the chance to make other choices, and that's the cost you spent, plus the cost you paid for the car. So to the consumer, if the benefit given by the choice, meaning the choice you made, the benefit you receive from that, is greater than the opportunity cost, meaning the other things that you could have done, then it's a great economic decision. However, if the benefit you receive from whatever that is not greater than the cost that you could have gotten, then it is a bad economic decision. You guys do this all subconsciously, you just don't necessarily realize it yet. But in economics, we have a term for it. It's opportunity costs. Now, as I mentioned, the producer also has opportunity cost to keep in mind. But you might think, how does the producer, the one who actually makes the good, have to pay anything? Well, here's the cost that they have to deal with. If their product doesn't satisfy the want, meaning they make a product like a new phone and nobody buys it, then the opportunity cost obviously for them would be they're going to go bankrupt and they could have spent their money not producing phones nobody wants. So, an example of that for you guys, let's start with production. In order to produce like an iPhone, you need money/resources at your disposal. If you have those money and resources at your disposal, then you have to determine if the cost warrants putting it into production. But Mr. Shoens, iPhones make a lot of money. How does it cost anything? Every CEO, business owner, Fortune 500 worker, they all have to weigh out the cost of their decisions. Suppose it wasn't the iPhone, but instead it was like a Samsung Galaxy. Would production of a Samsung Galaxy be a good idea given how dominant the iPhone market is? That's actually one of the interesting things. Samsung doesn't make any money off of their phones just by how crazy the phone market is. So obviously, it can be viewed as a bad economic decision at that point. And business owners, producers have to weigh all that out because it's opportunity costs. It's what you give up when you make an economic decision. You decide to do 1 hour of studying, you gave up 2 TV episodes. If that's a better choice, then it's a great decision. If it's the other way around, it's probably a bad decision. There are your notes for opportunity costs. Now, ever see one of these things? Yeah, I think a lot of us have. That's something known as scarcity in economics. Scarcity is the state of being in short supply of an item. You see that there's 5 forks there, but there's only 1 tomato, or tomato, whatever you prefer to call it. Scarcity is when the resources needed to satisfy a want is simply either not available or just not there. Now, when it comes to scarcity, this idea of being in short supply of an item, both the rich and the poor deal with scarcity. Whether it be food, whether it be a diamond engagement ring, sometimes things just go out of stock. Scarcity is not something that is just limited to the poor. An example for the rich, obviously, like suppose you are a pretty well-off person and you want to buy your significant other a diamond ring. Well, if the countries in Africa suddenly ran out of diamonds or stopped selling them, you would experience a scarcity. You would experience something known as out of stock. Keep these in mind because when we start talking about money and what that does to price, when stuff is not available, prices tend to go up a bit. Take, in fact, toilet paper as of late. Now, for the poor, when it comes to scarcity, when there's no good farmlands and all that different stuff, then food can be in scarcity. No matter what good it is, cars, food, diamond rings, gasoline, toilet paper, you name it. Scarcity is something that can happen for both rich and poor. There are your notes on scarcity. Now, finally, what does this actually look like when it comes to government and stuff? And this is going to kind of conclude it when it comes to the basics of economics. And then on Thursday, we'll be talking about a little bit more about business and then a little bit going into how money works. Now, when it comes to like the government of the United States of America, where does it play in when it comes to this economics things? Well, first of all, there's 3 different types of economies a country can have: traditional, command, and free markets. Let's start with traditional. Throughout history, most countries have had these things known as traditional economies. It's basically old school economies. It's where economic divisions are made by long established patterns of behavior that are unlikely to change. What does that look like? Imagine living in like 86 AD. You were born into a family that have long historical routes of being a blacksmith. You will most likely become a blacksmith. Your children will most likely be blacksmiths, and that just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. Now, the keyword is traditional. They still exist today, but it's not necessarily your most developed countries in the world. Um, the concept of being like in a profession that is kind of like family led and it's kind of old school, those still exist today. Obviously, the US is a lot different. I like this picture here because this is a picture of Vietnam. Those boats are really interesting because if I watched a documentary once on them, where literally there are people who are literally born on those boats and they live on those boats, they fish, they bring their fish to the docks, they sell them, and they die on those boats. They never necessarily go on dry land, which is crazy. That's a traditional economy right there. There are your notes for traditional economies. Now, command economies. Just like a puppeteer has control of all the strings, this is where the government controls the economy. This is where the government owns all the factors of production. They tell you what you get, what you consume, and all that different stuff. And hence the word command. They're in charge of everything. This may sound familiar, especially coming right off of political parties. Granted, I know I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this just because Corona, but you get the idea. Communist countries tend to have command economies. And if you don't know what communism means, it's the political theory that was derived by a man named Karl Marx, where that everything in a country should be publicly owned means that the government owns everything. Your house, your park, your school, your roads, your car, the factories, the stores, all of it. The idea of owning something doesn't exist in a communist country or in a command economy. And that ultimately means the government is the one making all the decisions. With those three factors of productions, land, labor, and capital, they make all the decisions. When it comes to consumption, they make all the decisions. Do you get a car or do you not? Do you get toilet paper today or do you not? That's what a command economy is all about. And some people might get a ton of resources. Take a look at this picture here. That's the People's Palace of Romania. When Romania was a command economy and a communist nation, that was one person's house, the dictator, Ceausescu. And trust me, not everybody in Romania had a house that nice. It's the heaviest building in the world today, still today. Other examples, Cuba is a great example of a command economy. North Korea as well, both communist nations, they decide who gets what and how it's distributed and stuff like that. These are your notes on command economies. Now the last one, and we'll wrap it up here for today, market economies. These are where it's the complete opposite of command economy. This is where you're in charge, the people. The people are free to make their choices when it comes to producing goods, distributing goods, as well as consuming goods. And private property exists, meaning individuals, not the government, owns the factors of productions. If you need a great example of that, the country that you live in right now. Obviously, they call it the American dream for a good reason, because if you want to do something, the government's not going to stop you when it comes to it. And that's known as free enterprise and also capitalism. We'll talk a little bit more about it before economics is done, but it's the free enterprise. You have the right to go on an enterprise, an entrepreneurship, to build a business, etc. Individuals are free to make the economic decisions, and they have very little government control when it comes to that. The government of the United States is not telling you to buy this. You decide to do that. In command economies, it's the exact opposite. Here are your last notes for it comes to today. Make sure you upload this to the note check on Turnitin.com. Otherwise, take care, guys. Bye-bye.